The heat came down like a punishment that July afternoon in 1882. It pressed against the Montana grasslands with a weight that made breathing feel like work, turned the horizon into a shimmering lie, and baked the dirt roads until they cracked open like old leather. The kind of heat that made sensible people stay indoors, that killed cattle if they wandered too far from water, that turned tempers sharp and patience thin. Ethan Cole wasn't a sensible man. He rode his mare, Duchess, at an easy pace along the fence line of his northern pasture, checking for breaks. 32 years old, weathered beyond his years, with hands calloused from wire and rope and a face that rarely smiled anymore. His ranch, the Double C, named for his father's initials before Ethan inherited it, sprawled across 3,000 acres of grassland and pine forest, backing up against the Bitterroot Range. It was good land, hard land, the kind that demanded everything and gave back just enough to keep a man coming back for more. He'd been out since dawn, and the sun was starting its slow descent when he spotted something unusual near the main gate where the ranch road met the county trail. A dark shape that didn't belong. Duchess noticed it too, her ears pricking forward. Ethan squinted against the glare. A trunk. A traveling trunk sitting in the dust like someone had dropped it there and walked away. Except someone hadn't walked away. As he got closer, he saw her. A woman, sitting on the trunk with her back straight as a fence post, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for tea service. She wore a dark blue traveling dress that had probably been smart when she'd put it on, days ago from the look of it, but was now wrinkled and dust-stained. A small hat sat askew on her dark hair, which had mostly escaped its pins and hung in damp strands around her face. She didn't look up when Duchess's hooves crunched on the gravel, didn't acknowledge his presence at all, just kept staring straight ahead at nothing. Ethan reined in about 10 feet away. "You lost, ma'am." No response, not even a flicker. He dismounted, tied Duchess to a fence post, and walked closer. That's when he saw the letter clutched in one of her hands, the paper crumpled and stained with what might have been tears, or sweat, or both. That's when he noticed her face. Not pretty in the conventional way, not the kind of delicate beauty the mail-order bride advertisements promised, but striking. Strong bones, a determined jaw, eyes the color of creek water that probably missed nothing when they weren't staring at the middle distance like they were now. And that's when he saw the ring of dust around her, the way it was disturbed, like she'd been sitting there for hours. Maybe since morning. "Ma'am?" He kept his voice gentle, the way he would with a spooked horse. "You need help?" Finally, her eyes shifted to him, slowly, like it took effort to come back from wherever she'd gone in her head. "Are you Ethan Cole?" Her voice was hoarse, probably from thirst, but there was East Coast in it. Education. Money, once upon a time. "I am." "Then no." She looked away again. "You can't help me. No one can." Ethan glanced around. The county road stretched empty in both directions. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles south. Town was 12 miles north. And the sun would be down in a few hours, at which point the temperature would drop 40 degrees and the coyotes would start their evening rounds. "You planning to sit here all night?" "I haven't decided yet. Might get cold." "I'm aware." He studied her for a long moment. There was something wrong here, something that went beyond a woman sitting on a trunk in the middle of nowhere. The wrongness sat in the air between them like a third presence. "That your trunk?" "Yes." "Heavy?" "Extremely. So someone brought you here, dropped you in your trunk at my gate and drove off." For the first time, something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe. Or rage. Or both twisted together so tight you couldn't separate them. Something like that. Ethan crouched down on his heels, bringing himself to eye level. Up close, he could see the tracks of dried tears on her cheeks, the way her hands were shaking slightly despite being locked together. He could also see the absolute rigidity in her spine, the way she held herself together through sheer force of will. "Who brought you here?" She laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "A man named Thomas Brennan. Do you know him?" Everyone knew Thomas Brennan. Rich, 45, owned the biggest ranch in the county after buying out 3 smaller spreads in the last 5 years. Twice widowed, no children, a man who wore his wealth like armor and his loneliness like a weapon. "I know of him." He placed an advertisement, in the Boston papers, for a wife. She said it flatly, like she was reciting a grocery list. I answered it. We corresponded for 3 months. He sent train fare. I came. Her hands tightened on the crumpled letter. He took one look at me at the station and changed his mind. The words landed like stones in still water. Ethan had heard of mail-order bride arrangements going wrong, but usually the rejection happened before the woman made the trip, before she'd crossed a continent on the promise of a new life, before she'd burned every bridge behind her. He changed his mind, Ethan repeated, keeping his voice neutral. I wasn't what he expected. Her jaw clenched. I'm 28. I told him that in my letters. I sent a photograph. But apparently, when he said he wanted someone youthful, he meant a girl, not a woman. When he said he wanted someone attractive, he had a very specific picture in mind, one I don't match. So he brought you here? Not directly. First, he took me to his ranch. Let me see it. The house. The life I thought I was going to have. Her voice cracked slightly, the first real break in her composure. Then he gave me this letter, loaded me and my trunk into his wagon, and dumped me at the nearest gate that wasn't his, which happened to be yours. She held out the letter with a shaking hand. Ethan took it carefully, like it might explode. The handwriting was neat, educated, the kind of script that came from expensive schools and professional correspondence. Miss Hart, upon reflection and careful consideration, I have determined that we would not suit. The qualities I require in a wife are not present in sufficient measure. I have arranged for your trunk to be delivered with you. Enclosed is $50 for your return journey. I trust you will make appropriate arrangements. I wish you well in your future endeavors. Thomas Brennan. $50. For crossing a continent. For trusting a stranger. For upending an entire life. Ethan read it twice, then looked at the woman, Miss Hart, still sitting on her trunk like she was waiting for a train that would never come. He give you the $50? Yes. Where is it? In my pocket. She touched her dress. I haven't spent it. Haven't even looked at it. Why not? Her eyes met his again, and this time there was fire in them. Because spending it would mean accepting this, and I'm not ready to accept this yet. Duchess stamped and blew, impatient with the delay. The sun continued its descent. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. Ethan stood up, his knees popping. He was getting too old for crouching in the dirt, too old for a lot of things. But he wasn't too old to recognize injustice when he saw it, and he wasn't too old to remember what it felt like to be thrown away by someone who was supposed to care. You got people back east? No. Friends? Family? My father died 2 years ago. Debts took everything. I worked as a governess until the family moved to Europe and didn't want me to come along. She recited it mechanically, like she'd explained it before. To Brennan, probably, in one of those letters. I have a cousin in Philadelphia who might take me in out of Christian duty, but she made it clear in her last letter that I'd be a burden. I don't want to be a burden. So you answered an advertisement. So I answered an advertisement. She looked at him directly. I'm educated, Mr. Cole. I speak French and German. I can keep books, manage a household, teach children. I'm healthy, I'm strong, and I work hard. I thought those things would be enough. I thought... Her voice broke again, and this time she couldn't quite catch it. I thought someone might want me anyway. The rawness in those last words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He knew that feeling, the sense of being fundamentally unwanted, of having something wrong in your basic composition that everyone else could see but you couldn't fix. His father had made sure he understood that feeling early and often. He looked at the trunk, then at the woman, then down the empty road toward Brennan's spread. 20 miles southeast, a sprawling operation with a big house and hired help and every comfort money could buy. And Brennan had looked at this woman, this educated, capable woman who'd crossed a continent on his invitation, and found her wanting. Something hot and sharp twisted in Ethan's gut. You can't stay here, he said finally. I know. Sun's going down, gets cold at night. Coyotes get bold. I know that too. So what's your plan? She looked at him for a long moment, then she looked down at her hands, at the crumpled letter, at the trunk beneath her. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't have one. I sat here thinking I'd figure something out, but I can't. I can't think. Every time I try, I just see his face when he looked at me at the station, like I was a disappointment, like I was a mistake. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I came so far. I was so sure, and he didn't even give me a chance. Ethan stood there, watching this stranger fall apart in slow motion, and felt the familiar weight of a decision settling onto his shoulders. The smart thing would be to ride into town, tell the sheriff about a stranded woman at his gate, let the proper channels handle it. The safe thing would be to give her directions to town, maybe offer to send someone back for her trunk, and then go home and forget any of this happened. He'd stopped doing the smart thing years ago, and he'd never been good at safe. Come on, he said. She looked up, confused. What? Get up, come on. I don't understand. You're coming to the ranch. He moved to the trunk, tested its weight. She hadn't been joking about it being heavy, and started dragging it toward Duchess. You'll stay in the spare room, get cleaned up, get some food in you, sleep in a real bed. Tomorrow, when you're thinking straight, you can figure out what you want to do. Mr. Cole? Ethan. Ethan. She stood up slowly, like her legs weren't quite working right. Why would you do that? He paused, the trunk halfway to his horse, and considered the question. Why would he? He didn't know her, didn't owe her anything. Taking in a strange woman would start tongues wagging all over the county. His reputation, already questionable for a man who chose to live alone, would get shredded. But when he looked at her, standing there in her ruined dress with her ruined plans, trying so hard to hold together pieces that were already broken, he saw something familiar, something he recognized. Because Brennan's an ass, he said finally, and because nobody deserves to be left at a gate like unwanted freight. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. I won't be a charity case. Didn't say you were. He got the trunk secured to Duchess's saddle with practiced efficiency. You said you can work hard? Good. Ranch always needs work. You can earn your keep while you figure things out. She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You'd let me work? On a ranch? You rather sit in the house doing needlepoint? I don't know how to do ranch work. You'll learn. I'm wearing a dress. We'll find you something that makes more sense. People will talk. People always talk. He held out his hand. What people think stopped mattering to me a long time ago. Question is, what matters to you? Sitting here until you freeze or starve, or taking a chance on something different? Eliza Hart looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Calloused, scarred, dirt under the nails. A working man's hand. Nothing like the soft, manicured hands of the men she'd known back east. Nothing like Thomas Brennan's hands, which had looked at her across the train station and found her wanting without ever touching her. She took it. His grip was firm, warm despite the heat, and steady. He pulled her up from the trunk, and she swayed slightly, her legs stiff from sitting for so long. You eaten today? He asked. Not since breakfast, at Brennan's ranch. Right, we'll fix that. He helped her up onto Duchess, then swung up behind her. It was improper, riding like this with a stranger, but Eliza found she didn't care. Propriety had gotten her exactly nowhere. Propriety had told her to wait for a good match, to accept whatever came, to be grateful for any offer. Propriety had led her here, to a gate in Montana, discarded like garbage. Maybe it was time to stop being proper. The ride to the ranch took 20 minutes. Duchess plodded along at a steady pace, unbothered by the extra weight, while Ethan kept one arm loosely around Eliza's waist to steady her. Neither of them spoke. Eliza watched the landscape change from open grassland to rolling hills dotted with pine. She saw cattle in the distance, their hides dark against the golden grass. She saw a creek cutting through a stand of cottonwoods, the water glinting in the fading light. It was beautiful, harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful in a way Boston never was. The ranch house appeared as they crested a hill. It wasn't large, a single-story log structure with a covered porch, a few outbuildings, a barn that had seen better days. Modest, working, nothing like Brennan's sprawling mansion with its gables and gardens. But it looked solid, real. like it had been built to last, not to impress. Ethan helped her down, tied Duchess to the porch rail, and hauled her trunk down. "Come on, I'll show you where you'll sleep." Inside, the house was sparse but clean. A main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a few closed doors leading to other rooms. The furniture was handmade, sturdy. There were no curtains, no decorations, nothing soft or decorative. A man's house, built for function. He led her to a small bedroom off the main room. It held a bed, a dresser, a washstand. A window looked out toward the hills. "Not much," Ethan said, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "But it's yours for now. Water in the pitcher, towels in the dresser. I'll get dinner started." "You cook?" The question slipped out before Eliza could stop it. He gave her a look. "I live alone. Either I cook or I starve. Neither option involves someone else doing it for me." "I didn't mean, I know what you meant." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Brennan tell you what he was looking for in a wife?" "He said he wanted a companion, someone to share his life with. He wanted a decoration, someone young and pretty to show off at church socials and make other men jealous." Ethan's voice was flat. "He didn't want a partner. He wanted a possession." "How do you know?" "Because I knew both his previous wives. Good women, both of them. They died young, worn out." He looked at her directly. "You might have dodged a bullet, Miss Hart." Then he left her alone. Eliza stood in the small room, listening to the sounds of Ethan moving around in the kitchen, and felt something crack open inside her chest. The tears she'd been holding back all day, all week really, since she'd first seen Brennan's face at the station, finally came. She cried quietly, efficiently, like everything else she did. She'd learned early that loud crying got you nowhere, that tears were a waste of water and time. But she let herself have this, just for a moment. Let herself grieve the life she'd imagined, the future she'd planned, the hope she'd carried across a continent. Then she washed her face in the basin, unpinned her hair, and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Not pretty enough for Thomas Brennan. Too old, too plain, too something. But maybe that was all right. Maybe there was something better than being pretty enough for Thomas Brennan. She didn't know what it was yet. But standing in this small room in this rough house on this hard land, Eliza Hart decided she was going to find out. Dinner was simple: beans, cornbread, coffee so strong it could strip paint. They ate in silence at the rough-hewn table, Ethan methodically working through his food while Eliza picked at hers. She was hungrier than she'd thought, but her stomach kept clenching every time she remembered the day, every time she remembered how far she'd fallen. "You don't have to talk about it," Ethan said finally, refilling his coffee. "But I need to know if Brennan's going to come looking for you, if there's going to be trouble." Liza shook her head. "He made it clear he wants nothing to do with me. I doubt he'll even remember my name by next week. Men like Brennan don't like being crossed. He might see you staying here as some kind of insult. I don't care what he sees it as." Ethan studied her across the table. "You sure about that?" Yes. And she was. The fear that had paralyzed her at the gate was burning away, leaving something harder in its place. Anger, maybe. Or determination. "I came here with nothing to lose. I still have nothing to lose. The worst has already happened. The worst is never what you think it is," Ethan said quietly. "It can always get worse." "Is that meant to be encouraging?" "It's meant to be honest." He pushed his plate away. "You want to work here, you need to understand what you're getting into. This isn't a gentleman's ranch. There's no house staff, no easy jobs. It's hard, dirty, sometimes dangerous. The land doesn't care if you're tired or hurt or having a bad day. It just keeps demanding." "I understand." "I don't think you do, but you will." Something in his tone made Eliza look up sharply. "Are you trying to scare me away?" "I'm trying to be clear, so when you decide to leave, and most people do, you can't say I didn't warn you." "Most people?" "I've had hired hands. They don't last. Too isolated, too much work, not enough pay. They head into town looking for easier money or better company and don't come back. And you stay anyway. This is my land, my father's land before that. Staying isn't a choice, it's what you do." Eliza heard the weight in those words, the obligation that ran deeper than choice. She understood it. She'd felt the same weight with her father, staying through the decline in debt, because family was what you did, not what you chose. "I won't leave," she said. "You don't know that." "I do, because I have nowhere else to go. And because—" She stopped, trying to find the words. "Because I'm tired of running, of being sent away, of being told I'm not enough." Her hands tightened on her coffee cup. "I may not know anything about ranching, but I know how to work until I can't anymore. I know how to keep going when everything says to quit. And I know what it's like to be judged and found wanting." Their eyes met across the table. "Tomorrow," Ethan said finally. "Sun's up at 5:30. We start at 6. Where's something you can move in?" "I don't have anything like that." "We'll figure something out." He stood, collected the plates, and moved to the kitchen. Eliza sat for a moment longer, listening to the sound of water being pumped, dishes being washed. Through the window, she could see the last light fading from the sky, the stars starting to emerge. 1,000 miles from Boston, a lifetime from the person she'd been this morning. She didn't know if this was rock bottom or a new beginning. Maybe it was both. But for the first time since Thomas Brennan had looked at her with disappointment and dismissal, Eliza Hart felt something other than despair. She felt determined. The next morning came too early. Eliza woke to the sound of Ethan moving around the house, the smell of coffee, and a deep ache in every muscle she'd forgotten she had. Sitting on that trunk for hours had done more damage than she'd realized. She forced herself up, washed quickly in cold water, and stared at the contents of her trunk. Dresses. All dresses. Nice ones, the kind appropriate for a rancher's wife entertaining guests and going to town. Useless for actual work. There was a knock on her door. "You decent?" Ethan's voice came through the wood. "Yes." He opened the door, took one look at her standing in her nightgown and chemise, and quickly averted his eyes. "Right. Forgot you wouldn't have— Hold on." He disappeared and returned a minute later with an armful of clothes. "These were my mother's. She was about your size. They've been in a trunk for 10 years, but they're clean." Eliza took them carefully. Work clothes, sturdy cotton shirts, split skirts designed for riding, a worn leather vest. Practical. Real. "Thank you. Get dressed. Breakfast in 10 minutes." She put on the clothes, which fit reasonably well, and found a pair of boots at the bottom of the pile that were only slightly too large. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the Boston governess in her proper dress. In her place stood someone who looked like she might actually belong here. Breakfast was quick. Eggs, more coffee, bread toasted over the stove. Then Ethan handed her a pair of work gloves. "First lesson, mucking stalls." "I'm sorry?" "The barn, the horses, the mess they make. Someone has to clean it. Today, that's you." It was, without question, the worst thing Eliza had ever done. The smell alone nearly drove her back to the house. The physical labor of shoveling manure into a wheelbarrow, hauling it to the compost pile, spreading fresh hay. It made her muscles scream and her hands blister even through the gloves. Ethan worked nearby, repairing tack, occasionally offering brief instructions. He didn't help. Didn't take over when she struggled. Just let her figure it out, fail, and try again. By mid-morning, Eliza wanted to cry. By noon, she wanted to die. By mid-afternoon, she'd moved past both and entered a strange state of numbness, where she simply kept moving because stopping would mean admitting defeat. "That's enough," Ethan said finally. "You'll hurt yourself if you keep going." Eliza leaned on her shovel, breathing hard, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. "I'm not finished." "You're finished for today. Come on. I'll show you the rest of the property." They walked the fence lines, Ethan pointing out landmarks and explaining the layout. The north pasture where the cattle grazed in summer. The south pasture kept for hay. The creek that ran through both, the lifeline of the whole operation. The pine forest on the eastern edge where the predators lived. Wolves, mountain lions, bears. "You don't go into the trees alone," Ethan said. "Not until you know how to shoot, and even then, you go armed and alert. You have a lot of rules. I have a lot of ways to not die. You're welcome to ignore them, but the land won't care about your ignorance when it kills you." Eliza looked at him sharply. "Do Do you always assume the worst? I assume what experience teaches. The worst happens more often than the best out here. That's bleak. That's honest. They walked in silence for a while, following the creek. Eliza watched the water move over stones, clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. She saw fish darting in the shallows, a hawk circling overhead, wildflowers she couldn't name dotting the banks. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. Most people just see the work. I see that too, but the beauty's there anyway. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to catch. He looked away, back toward the ranch. We should head back. You need water and food before you pass out. That evening, Eliza could barely move. Her hands were blistered, her back ached, her legs trembled when she tried to stand. She forced down dinner, took a cold bath in the washroom, and collapsed into bed. She'd never been this tired in her life, never pushed her body this hard, demanded this much of herself. And despite everything, despite the pain and exhaustion and the voice in her head saying she'd made a terrible mistake, Eliza smiled into her pillow. Because she'd done it. She'd survived her first day. She'd worked until she couldn't anymore, and she hadn't quit. Thomas Brennan had looked at her and seen someone not worth his time. But out here, covered in dirt and manure and sweat, Eliza was starting to see someone else, someone who might be worth her own. The second day was worse than the first. Eliza woke before dawn to muscles that had turned to stone overnight. Every movement sent sharp protest through her body. Her hands, wrapped in strips of cloth Ethan had left outside her door, throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. She sat on the edge of the bed for a full minute, trying to convince her legs to work. The knock came at 5:30, sharp and unsympathetic. You up? Eliza forced herself to stand, ignoring the way her calves screamed. Yes. 5 minutes. She dressed in the dark, fumbling with buttons her stiff fingers could barely manage. The shirt from yesterday was sweat-stained and dirty, but it was all she had that made sense. She'd have to wash clothes tonight. Add that to the growing list of things she'd never had to think about before. In Boston, someone else had done her laundry. Someone else had prepared her meals. Someone else had made sure the house ran smoothly while she taught the children and managed their schedules and pretended she was more than hired help with a fancy title. Out here, there was no someone else. There was just her and the work and the land that didn't care if she was ready. Breakfast was the same as yesterday. Eggs, bread, coffee. Ethan ate quickly, mechanically, like fueling a machine. Eliza tried to match his pace and nearly choked. Slow down, he said without looking up. You can't work if you're sick. I'm fine. You're not, but you will be. He stood, carried his plate to the basin. Today we're checking the north fence. Cattle got out last week. Need to find where and fix it. How far is the north fence? 3 miles. We'll ride. Eliza's entire body clenched at the thought of getting on a horse. I don't ride well. You'll learn that too. The horse Ethan saddled for her was a placid mare named Rosie, older and calmer than Duchess. Eliza managed to mount without falling, which felt like a victory. But the moment they started moving, every step the horse took jarred through her sore muscles. They rode in silence across the grassland as the sun climbed higher. The morning was already warm, promising another brutal afternoon. Eliza focused on staying upright, on not embarrassing herself by falling off or crying out when Rosie stumbled over uneven ground. Ethan seemed content with the silence. He rode with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Looking for what, Eliza couldn't say. Trouble? Probably. He seemed like the kind of man who expected it. After an hour, they reached a section of fence where the wire sagged and a post leaned at a dangerous angle. Here, Ethan said, dismounting. Something hit this, probably a bull. They get territorial, don't pay attention, slam into things. He pulled tools from his saddlebag and started working. Eliza watched for a moment, then climbed down from Rosie with all the grace of a sack of flour. What can I do? Ethan glanced at her, seemed about to say nothing, then reconsidered. Hold this steady while I dig out the post. The work was hard, physical, and required a kind of coordination Eliza didn't have. She held things at the wrong angle, handed him the wrong tools, asked questions that probably seemed obvious to anyone who'd done this before. Ethan corrected her with brief, blunt instructions. No patience for incompetence, but no cruelty either. By the time they finished, the sun was directly overhead, and Eliza's water canteen was empty. "There's a creek about a quarter-mile west," Ethan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We'll water the horses and rest." The creek was shallow and clear, running over smooth stones. The horses drank while Ethan refilled the canteens. Eliza sat in the shade of a cottonwood, her body one continuous ache. "How long have you run this ranch alone?" she asked. Ethan looked up from the water. 5 years. My father died in 77, left me the land and enough debt to drown in. But you didn't drown. Not yet. He brought her a filled canteen. Came close a few times, drought, cattle disease, prices dropping. Every year something tries to kill this place. Every year I figure out how to keep it breathing. Why? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Why what? Why keep fighting for it? If it's this hard, if it keeps trying to kill you, why not sell? Go somewhere easier? Ethan sat down against a tree across from her, his long legs stretched out. For a moment, he didn't answer, just stared at the water moving over rocks. "My father built this ranch from nothing," he said finally. "Came out here with a wagon and a dream and broke his back making it real. He wasn't a good man, drank too much, had a temper, didn't know how to show affection without making it hurt. But he loved this land. Only thing he ever loved, I think." His jaw tightened. "When he died, I thought about walking away. Thought about letting it all go to the bank and starting fresh somewhere else. But then I'd be admitting he was right. Right about what? That I wasn't worth anything, that I'd fail at everything I touched, that I was a disappointment." He picked up a stone, turned it over in his hands. "So I stayed, not because I wanted to, because I had to prove him wrong." Eliza heard the bitterness in his voice, the old anger that had settled into something harder and colder. She recognized it because she'd felt it too. The need to prove worth to someone who'd never see it. "My father loved me," she said quietly, "but he loved his status more, his reputation. When the debts came, when everything fell apart, he couldn't face it. He got sick, and I think part of him wanted to die rather than see what we'd become." She pulled at a piece of grass. "I stayed with him until the end, watched the house get sold, the furniture auctioned, everything we'd been reduced to nothing. And when it was over, when I had to figure out what came next, all I could think was that I'd wasted years on a life that didn't matter." It mattered to him. Not enough. If it had, he would have prepared better, protected me better. Instead, he left me with nothing, and expected me to be grateful for the nothing. Ethan looked at her across the space between them. "Is that why you answered Brennan's ad?" "Yes, and because I was stupid enough to think someone might want me for more than just what I could do." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out I was only worth what I looked like, and I didn't look like enough. Brennan's a fool." "Maybe, but he's not wrong. I'm not beautiful. I'm not young. I'm not the kind of woman men write poetry about or fight duels over." "Good." Eliza blinked. "What?" "Good," Ethan repeated. "Beautiful women get treated like ornaments. Young women get treated like children, and poetry's useless when the roof needs fixing." He stood, brushed dirt from his pants. "You want to be valued for what you can do? Out here. That's all that matters. Nobody cares what you look like when a fence needs mending or cattle need moving. They care if you show up and do the work." He walked to the horses, checking their saddles, giving her space to absorb his words. Eliza sat in the grass, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly. Something harder, more solid. Determination. They rode back to the ranch as the afternoon heat peaked. Eliza's skin burned despite the hat Ethan had insisted she wear. Her throat was dry again, her hands blistered worse than yesterday, her legs trembling with exhaustion. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, just kept riding, kept moving, kept pushing through the discomfort until they reached the barn and she could finally slide off Rosie and stand on solid ground. "Unsaddle her," Ethan said. "Brush her down, check her hooves, then turn her out to pasture." Eliza stared at him. "I don't know how to do any of that." "Then watch me do it with Duchess and copy." So she did. fumbling with buckles and straps, struggling to lift the heavy saddle, running the brush over Rosie's coat in clumsy strokes. The mare was patient with her incompetence, standing still while Eliza figured things out through trial and error. When she finally led Rosie to the pasture gate, the horse walked through without a backward glance. "Good," Ethan said from behind her. "Tomorrow you'll be faster." Eliza turned to face him, sweat-soaked and filthy and so tired she could barely stand. "Is there a tomorrow where I'm not in pain?" "Eventually. Few more weeks, your body will adjust." "Weeks? You wanted to work. This is what work feels like." He headed toward the house. "Wash up. Dinner in an hour. After that, I'll teach you to shoot." "Shoot? Can't send you out alone if you can't defend yourself. Between the predators and the trespassers, you need to know how to use a rifle." "I've never even held a gun." "You've never mucked a stall either. Didn't stop you from learning." That night, after a dinner of venison stew and potatoes, Ethan brought out 2 rifles. One was well used, the stock worn smooth from years of handling. The other looked newer, lighter. "This was my mother's," he said, handing her the lighter rifle. "She was small like you. Couldn't handle the recoil on the bigger guns. My father had this made special." Eliza took it carefully, surprised by the weight. "Your mother shot?" "Had to. Out here everyone shoots. Animals, raiders, accidents. Doesn't matter if you're a man or woman when trouble comes. You either protect yourself or you don't survive." He spent the next hour teaching her the basics. How to hold the rifle, how to aim, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. They used tin cans lined up on fence posts as targets, and Eliza missed every single shot. "You're anticipating the recoil," Ethan said, standing behind her to adjust her stance. "Tensing up before you fire. The rifle feels it and pulls off target." "I can't help it." "Yes, you can. It's just fear. And fear is something you control, not something that controls you." Eliza lowered the rifle, turned to look at him. "Is that what you do? Control your fear?" "Every day." "Of what?" He took the rifle from her, checked the chamber, handed it back. "Failing, losing the ranch, proving my father right." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Dying alone out here, with nobody to know or care." The honesty in those words struck Eliza harder than she expected. She thought him invulnerable, carved from the same hard stone as the land. But he was just as afraid as she was, just better at hiding it. "Try again," Ethan said. She raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel, at a can glinting in the fading light. Breathed out slowly. Squeezed. The can jumped and fell. "There," Ethan said, and she heard something like approval in his voice. "Do it again." She did, and again, and by the time full dark fell and they headed back to the house, Eliza had hit 5 cans out of 20 shots. Not good, but better. A start. The days blurred into each other after that. Wake before dawn, breakfast, work until her body threatened to quit, brief rest, more work, dinner, evening chores, collapse into bed. Repeat. Every day the same routine, the same exhaustion, the same push to keep going when everything said to stop. But slowly, things changed. Her hands developed calluses instead of blisters. Her muscles stopped screaming and started just aching. She learned to anticipate what Ethan needed before he asked, to read the land's rhythms, to understand the difference between a fence that needed immediate repair and one that could wait. She learned the names of the cattle, or at least the ones with distinct markings. Big Red, the bull who ruled the herd, Patches. The cow with white spots who always wandered. Stumpy, the calf born with a shortened leg who defied expectations and survived. She learned to ride without thinking about it, to move with Rosie instead of against her, to shoot with enough accuracy that Ethan stopped hovering when she carried a rifle, to mend tack and mix feed and 100 other small skills that added up to competence. And she learned Ethan. He was a man of few words and even fewer expressions. He didn't smile often, didn't joke, didn't engage in the kind of small talk that filled silence. But he was fair. When she did good work, he acknowledged it with a brief nod or a "that'll do." When she made mistakes, he corrected them without judgment or anger, just showed her the right way and expected her to remember. He was also profoundly lonely, though Eliza suspected he'd deny it if asked. He'd clearly been alone so long he'd forgotten how to be otherwise. Forgot that meals could involve conversation, that evenings didn't have to be spent in separate rooms, that companionship was more than just working alongside someone in silence. 3 weeks into her stay, during a particularly brutal day of hauling hay, Eliza decided to push back. "Do you ever talk about anything besides work?" she asked, dragging another bale into the barn. Ethan looked at her, genuinely confused. "Like what?" "I don't know. Books, music, the weather beyond how it affects the ranch." "Don't have time for books. Don't play music. And the weather only matters for how it affects the ranch. That's bleak. That's practical." Eliza dropped the bale with more force than necessary. "It's also boring. Don't you ever want to talk about something that doesn't involve cattle or fences or predators?" "Not particularly." "Why not?" "Because talking doesn't get work done." "We're not working right now. We're taking a water break. This would be the perfect time for conversation." Ethan drank from his canteen, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "All right, what do you want to talk about?" The question caught Eliza off guard. She'd been complaining without actually thinking about alternatives. "I don't know. Tell me something about yourself that isn't related to the ranch." "There isn't anything." "Everyone has something." "Not me." "That's not true." "What about before your father died? What were you like?" Ethan's expression shuddered. "Different." "How?" "Just different, younger, stupider." He set down the canteen. "Break's over." He walked away before she could press further, leaving Eliza standing in the barn holding questions that clearly had no welcome answers. That night, she tried a different approach. After dinner, instead of retreating to her room, she sat in the main room with a book from the small shelf near the fireplace. Ethan settled into his chair with a ledger, working through accounts by lamplight. They sat in silence for 20 minutes before Eliza spoke. "This book is terrible." Ethan looked up. "Then read a different one." "They're all terrible. Have you actually read any of these?" "No, they were my mother's." "She had questionable taste." Eliza closed the book. "Do you remember her?" "Some. She died when I was 12. "I'm sorry." "Long time ago." "That doesn't make it hurt less." Ethan's pen paused on the page. "No, it doesn't." "What was she like?" "Why do you care?" "Because you gave me her clothes. Let me use her rifle. I'm living in her house, wearing her things, and I don't even know her name." Something shifted in Ethan's face. Not quite pain, but close. "Catherine. She was called Catherine. Was she happy here?" "I don't know. She never said otherwise, but my father wasn't an easy man to live with. She worked hard, kept the house, raised me as best she could. Then she got sick one winter and didn't recover." He looked back at his ledger. "That's all there is to tell." "I doubt that." "Well, that's all I'm telling." Eliza recognized a wall when she hit one. She opened the book again, pretending to read while actually watching Ethan work through his accounts. He wrote with careful precision, double-checking numbers, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "I'm observing." "It's rude. So is refusing to have a conversation." "I thought we were having one." "We were. Then you shut it down." Ethan set down his pen with deliberate care. "What do you want from me, Eliza?" It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his voice did something strange to her pulse. "I want to know the person whose home I'm sharing. I want to understand why you took in a complete stranger and asked nothing in return. I want—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. "What?" "I want to not feel alone," she said quietly. "I've felt alone for years. In my father's house, in the families I worked for, in every room I've ever occupied. I thought maybe here it would be different, but you're as alone as I am, and that just makes it worse." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed to the shelf, and pulled down a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "My father drank to forget," he said, pouring. "I drink to remember why I don't." He handed her a glass. "To being alone together." Eliza took it, the whiskey burning her throat when she sipped. That's depressing. That's honest. They drank in silence, the lamplight flickering across the walls, the night pressing against the windows. Outside, a coyote called and another answered. The sound was lonely and wild and somehow fitting. I wanted to be a teacher, Ethan said suddenly. When I was young, wanted to go back east, get educated, come back and start a school. Thought I could make a difference that way. Eliza set down her glass. What happened? My father laughed, said teaching was for weak men who couldn't handle real work. Said if I left the ranch, I was dead to him. He drained his whiskey. So I stayed, gave up what I wanted to avoid losing what I had, ended up losing it anyway when he died and nearly took the ranch with him. Do you regret it? Every day. But regret doesn't change anything, just sits there reminding you of all the paths you didn't take. I wanted to travel, Eliza said. See Europe, Asia, places I'd only read about. But my father needed me, and then he died, and then I needed work, and travel became something other people did. She picked at the edge of her glass. I used to imagine what my life could have been if I'd made different choices. But those choices were never really mine to make. They're yours now. Are they? I'm here because I had nowhere else to go. That's not choice. That's survival. Sometimes they're the same thing. They looked at each other across the room, two people who'd been shaped by circumstances beyond their control, who'd learned to endure rather than live, who'd forgotten what it felt like to want something just because it made them happy. Why did you really take me in? Eliza asked. The truth this time. Ethan refilled his glass, considered the question. Because I saw myself in you. Standing at that gate, rejected and alone, trying to figure out how to keep breathing when everything had fallen apart. He met her eyes, and because I thought maybe if I helped you, it would mean I wasn't completely worthless. The rawness in his admission cut through every defense Eliza had built. You're not worthless. Most days I believe that. Others, I'm not sure. I'm sure. Why? You barely know me. I know you work until you can't anymore. I know you took in a stranger who had nothing to offer. I know you're teaching me to survive in a world that wants to kill me. That's not worthless. That's... She searched for the word. That's decent. And decent is rarer than you think. Ethan looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. I'm not decent. I'm just tired of being alone. Then stop pushing people away. I'm not pushing you away. You are. Every time I try to talk about something real, you shut down. Every time I get close to understanding you, you retreat. I'm right here, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere, but you have to let me in. He stood abruptly, walked to the window, stared out at the darkness. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I don't know how. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. Eliza stood, crossed to him, stopped a few feet away. Close enough to touch, but not touching. You start by talking, by answering questions instead of deflecting, by trusting that someone might actually want to know you. Why would you? Because I'm alone too, and I'm tired of it. They stood in the silence, the space between them charged with something neither could name. Then Ethan turned, looked at her directly, and Eliza saw everything he kept hidden. The fear, the loneliness, the desperate hope that maybe this time would be different. I don't want to hurt you, he said quietly. Then don't. I don't know if I can promise that. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for honesty. Ethan reached out slowly, his calloused hand touching her cheek with surprising gentleness. I'm glad you're here. I don't say it because saying things makes them real, and real things can be taken away. But I'm glad. Eliza's breath caught. I'm glad too. They stayed like that, connected by touch and confession, until Ethan pulled back and cleared his throat. It's late. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Storm's coming. The moment broke. Eliza nodded, stepping away, creating safe distance again. How do you know? Pressure in the air, cattle are restless. Trust me, it's coming. He was right. The storm hit 2 days later with a violence that shook the house and turned the world into a wall of water. Rain hammered the roof, wind screamed through gaps in the boards, and thunder cracked so loud it felt like the sky was splitting open. Eliza and Ethan worked through it, securing animals, reinforcing structures, fighting against nature's assault with every tool they had. They were soaked within minutes, exhausted within hours. But they didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The ranch depended on it. When the storm finally passed, leaving destruction and mud in its wake, they stood in the barn surveying the damage. Roof leaking, fence down in 3 places, cattle scattered across 2 counties. "This is going to take weeks to fix," Ethan said, water dripping from his hat. "Then we have weeks of work ahead." He looked at her, this woman who'd been a stranger a month ago, now standing beside him covered in mud and determination. "You could have stayed inside, kept dry and safe. So could you. This is my ranch, and I live here too. That makes it my problem as much as yours." Something passed between them then. Recognition. Partnership. The understanding that they were in this together, whether they'd planned it or not. "All right then," Ethan said. "Partner?" Eliza smiled, tired and filthy and strangely happy. "Partner." They worked through the rest of the day and into the evening, driven by necessity and something else, something that felt like purpose, like belonging. And when they finally collapsed at the dinner table, too tired to even eat properly, Eliza realized she hadn't thought about Thomas Brennan in weeks, hadn't mourned the life she'd lost or wondered what might have been. Because this hard, brutal, unforgiving life was becoming hers, and she was becoming someone who could handle it. The town of Birch Falls sat 12 miles north of the Double C Ranch, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the main road like they'd been dropped there by accident and decided to stay. It had a general store, a saloon, a church, a post office, and enough gossip to fuel a city 10 times its size. Eliza had managed to avoid it for 6 weeks. "We need supplies," Ethan said over breakfast, his tone suggesting he was as enthusiastic about the trip as she was. "Flour, salt, nails, wire. Can't put it off any longer." "Can I stay here?" "No." "Why not?" "Because people have already started talking. If you never show your face, it gets worse." "What are they saying?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "It does if it affects you. It doesn't." "Ethan." He set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "They're saying you're my mistress, that I'm keeping you out here for ungentlemanly purposes, that you're a woman of loose morals who seduced a lonely rancher." He looked at her directly. "They're saying exactly what you'd expect small-minded people to say when a man and woman live together without being married." Heat flooded Eliza's face, not from shame, but from anger. "And what do you say?" "I don't say anything. I buy my supplies and leave. That's not good enough. It's all I've got." He stood, carried his plate to the basin. "Get ready. We leave in an hour." The ride into town was tense and silent. Eliza wore her least damaged dress, the dark green one that had survived the journey from Boston relatively intact. She'd pinned her hair up properly, made herself look as respectable as possible. Armor, she told herself. Armor against judgment. Ethan wore his usual work clothes, cleaned up but still clearly a rancher. He sat straight in the saddle, his face set in hard lines, preparing for a different kind of battle than the ones they fought on the ranch. Birch Falls appeared over a rise, and Eliza's stomach clenched. She'd faced down charging cattle, learned to shoot, survived storms that had nearly destroyed the ranch. But the thought of walking into that town, feeling eyes on her, hearing whispers behind hands, that terrified her in ways the land never had. "Stay close," Ethan said as they reached the edge of town. "Don't engage if someone says something cruel. Just ignore them." "I'm not a child. I know. But I also know how vicious people can be when they smell weakness." They tied their horses outside the general store. Eliza noticed the way conversations stopped when they approached, the way women clutched their shawls tighter and men suddenly found their boots fascinating. The attention felt like insects crawling on her skin. Inside the store, a portly man behind the counter looked up, and his expression shifted from welcoming to wary in the space of a heartbeat. "Cole," he said with a nod. Then his eyes slid to Eliza and away just as quickly. "Morning, Patterson." Ethan pulled out a list. "Need these items. Can you put them together while we wait?" Patterson took the list without meeting Ethan's eyes. Sure thing, take about 20 minutes. Fine. They moved to the back of the store where fabric and household goods lined the shelves. Eliza pretended to examine a bolt of cloth while trying not to hear the whispers that had started up again near the front. Shameless, living out there alone with him. I heard she was a mail-order bride that Brennan rejected. Poor judgment on his part. Keeping her makes him look desperate. Makes him look like a man with needs, if you ask me. Eliza's hands clenched on the fabric. Ethan touched her elbow lightly. A brief contact that said he'd heard it too, that he was sorry, that they just needed to endure. The door opened with a jingle of bells. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor. Well, well, Ethan Cole. Haven't seen you in town for a while. Eliza turned and felt her heart drop into her stomach. Thomas Brennan stood in the doorway, filling it with his presence. He was a large man, not fat, but solid, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His clothes were expensive, tailored, everything about him screaming wealth and position. His eyes found Eliza immediately, widened slightly in recognition, then narrowed. "Miss Hart," he said, and his tone made her name sound like an accusation. What an unexpected surprise. Ethan stepped slightly in front of Eliza, not obviously protective, but there. "Brennan, well, I heard rumors that you'd taken in a stray," Brennan said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Didn't realize it was the same woman I sent away weeks ago. Small world." "Is there something you need?" Ethan's voice was flat, controlled. "Just picking up my order, but I'm curious, Cole. What possessed you to take in my leavings? Feeling charitable? Or just lonely enough to overlook certain deficiencies?" The insult landed like a slap. Eliza felt her face burn, felt the weight of every person in the store watching, waiting to see what would happen. Ethan's posture changed. Not much, just a subtle shift that suggested violence was suddenly on the table. "Watch your mouth." "Or what? You'll defend her honor. Bit late for that, don't you think? The whole county knows she's living in your house, unchaperoned. Whatever honor she had is long gone. The only thing gone is your right to speak about her." Ethan's voice dropped to something dangerous. "She's under my protection now. That means you keep her name out of your mouth." Brennan laughed, the sound rich and condescending. "Your protection? That's quaint. Tell me, does she earn her keep on her back, or have you actually found her useful in other ways?" Ethan moved, fast. His fist connected with Brennan's jaw before anyone could react, sending the larger man stumbling backward into a display of canned goods. The crash echoed through the sudden silence. Brennan recovered quickly, wiping blood from his split lip, his expression shifting from shock to rage. "You dare! I dare!" Ethan's hands were still clenched, ready. "Say one more word about her, and I'll break your jaw so you can't." "Gentlemen, please!" Patterson rushed from behind the counter, his face pale. "No fighting in my store!" Brennan straightened, adjusted his coat, his eyes burning with humiliation and anger. But he was smart enough to recognize when he'd been beaten, at least for the moment. "This isn't over, Cole," he said quietly. "You've made an enemy today. Had you as an enemy before? Nothing's changed." Brennan looked at Eliza one more time, his expression filled with contempt and something else. Regret, maybe, or calculation. Then he turned and walked out, leaving a wake of tension behind him. The store remained silent for a long moment. Then the whispers started up again, louder this time, excited. "Did you see?" Punched him right in the face. "Over that woman? Brennan's not going to let this go." Ethan turned to Patterson. "Our order ready?" Yes, almost. Just need a few more. We'll wait outside." He took Eliza's arm gently and guided her toward the door. She moved mechanically, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. Ethan had hit Thomas Brennan, in front of witnesses, for her. Outside, the sun felt too bright, the air too thin. Eliza leaned against the store's wall, trying to steady her breathing. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "I shouldn't have lost my temper. You defended me. I made it worse. Now the whole town will be talking about how I got into a fistfight over my supposed mistress. Your reputation is destroyed." My reputation was destroyed the moment Brennan left me at your gate. Eliza looked at him, this rough man who'd taken her in and asked nothing, who'd just risked everything to defend her against vicious words. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? Because he deserved it, and because he stopped, looked away. Because nobody gets to talk about you like that, not while I'm standing there. Something warm spread through Eliza's chest, something that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Brennan's not the type to let this slide. He'll come back at us somehow. Let him try. Ethan looked at her with something like respect. You've gotten harder since you arrived. I've had good teachers. The land. The work. You. She pushed off from the wall. I'm not the same woman who sat at that gate waiting for someone to save her. I don't need saving anymore. No, Ethan agreed quietly. You don't. They loaded their supplies in tense silence, aware of eyes watching from windows, people talking behind closed doors. The story would spread through the county by nightfall, Ethan Cole and Thomas Brennan coming to blows over a woman. The scandal would burn for weeks. On the ride back, Eliza broke the silence. Do you regret it? Which part? Taking me in, everything that's happened since. Ethan was quiet for a long time, guiding Duchess around a washout in the road. No, he said finally. I don't regret it. You? No. Even with today. Even with the gossip and judgment and everything else. She looked at the land stretching out around them, harsh and beautiful. I'd rather be here, hated and free, than back east, proper and dying inside. Freedom's overrated when you're starving. So is propriety when you're suffocating. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, two people who'd chosen hard truth over comfortable lies. But the peace didn't last. 3 days later, they were repairing fence in the south pasture when they saw riders approaching. 5 men, moving with purpose. Get behind me, Ethan said quietly, his hand moving to the rifle in his saddle holster. Who are they? Trouble. The riders reined in 30 feet away. Eliza recognized 2 of them from town, men who'd been in the general store during the confrontation. The others were strangers, hard-faced men who looked like they were paid to cause problems. Cole, the leader, a lean man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, spoke with bureaucratic authority. We need to talk. So talk, Jenkins. There's been complaints about the situation out here, about you harboring a woman of questionable character. Ethan's jaw tightened. Harboring? She's a guest working for her room and board. Last I checked, that wasn't illegal. It is when it creates a public nuisance, when it affects community standards. Community standards. Ethan's voice dripped contempt. Who's complaining? Let me guess. Brennan? Jenkins shifted in his saddle. Mister. Brennan has expressed concerns, yes, as have others. The general consensus is that this arrangement is improper and reflects poorly on the county. The general consensus can go to hell. Cole, no. Ethan's voice was hard as iron. You ride out here with your bought men to tell me how to run my property? To tell me who I can and can't employ? On whose authority? The law's authority. What law? Show me the statute that says a rancher can't hire help. There's no statute against hiring help, but there are laws about decency, about cohabitation without marriage, about controlling women. Eliza stepped forward before Ethan could stop her. That's what this is really about, isn't it? A woman who doesn't fit into your neat little boxes, who refuses to disappear when she's told to. Jenkins looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, this isn't personal. It's entirely personal. Thomas Brennan threw me away like garbage. And now that I've found somewhere else to be, he can't stand it. So he's using you to finish the job. Miss Hart. Mrs. Hart. The lie came easily, smoothly. My husband died 2 years ago. I came west to start over. Mr. Cole has graciously employed me as his housekeeper. There's nothing improper about a widow working for wages. It was a gamble. A desperate attempt to reframe the narrative, to give them something acceptable to latch onto. Eliza saw Ethan's eyes widen slightly, but he didn't contradict her. Jenkins looked between them, clearly trying to decide if he believed it. Is that true, Cole? Would I lie to a lawman? Ethan's voice was dry. I'm asking if Mrs. Hart is employed as your housekeeper. That's what she said, isn't it? Jenkins frowned. The men behind him shifted, hands near weapons, waiting for orders. The tension stretched thin as wire. There's still talk, Jenkins said finally, about impropriety. People talk. That's what they do when their own lives are too boring to sustain them. Ethan crossed his arms. But unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, you're on my property without invitation. That makes you trespassers. We're investigating a complaint. You're harassing a citizen on behalf of a rich man who's nursing a bruised ego. There's a difference. Jenkins' face reddened. You assaulted Thomas Brennan in front of witnesses. He insulted Mrs. Hart. I defended her honor. If he wants to press charges, tell him to come do it himself instead of sending you to do his dirty work. The standoff held for another long moment. Then Jenkins gathered his reins, clearly deciding this wasn't worth the trouble. This isn't over, he said, but it sounded weak even to him. It is unless you come back with an actual warrant. Ethan's voice was steel. Now get off my land. They rode away slowly, maintaining dignity even in retreat. Eliza watched them go, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. That was stupid, Ethan said once they were out of earshot. Which part? All of it, but especially the widow story. What happens when someone checks and finds out you were never married? Who's going to check? It's not like there's a registry they can consult, and it's a better story than the truth. The truth is simpler. You work here. End of story. The truth isn't enough for them. They need something that fits their worldview. A widow working for wages is respectable. A rejected mail-order bride living with a bachelor is scandal. Eliza met his eyes. I gave them what they needed to back off, at least for now. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing. You're getting good at this. At what? Surviving, fighting, not taking their garbage without pushing back. I learned from the best. They finished the fence repair in silence, but the mood had shifted. The confrontation had made something clear. They were in this together now, whether they'd planned it or not. Every choice one made affected the other. Every stand taken had consequences for both. That night, Ethan poured them both whiskey without being asked. We need to talk about what happens next, he said, settling into his chair. All right. Brennan's not going to let this go. Today was just the opening move. He'll keep pushing until either we cave or he finds another way to hurt us. So what do? We have options. You could leave, go to another town, start fresh where nobody knows the story. Eliza's chest tightened. Is that what you want? No, but it might be the smart thing. I don't want to be smart. I want to stay. Even knowing it's going to get harder, that people will make your life miserable, they already do. At least here I have purpose. Work that matters. Someone who... She stopped, not sure how to finish. Someone who what? Someone who sees me as more than a mistake or a scandal or a problem to be solved. The words came out rougher than she intended. You see me, Ethan, the real me, not the version I'm supposed to be. He looked at her across the space between them, his expression unreadable. I see someone who's stronger than she knows, who came here broken and built herself back into something formidable. That's not me alone. That's this place, the work. You teaching me to survive. I didn't teach you strength. I just gave you space to find it yourself. They sat in the lamplight, drinking whiskey and speaking truths they'd been avoiding. Outside, the night pressed close, full of sounds that no longer frightened Eliza. Coyotes calling, wind in the pines, the distant lowing of cattle. There's another option, Ethan said finally, his voice careful. What? We could make the lie true. Eliza's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying if you were actually my wife, not my housekeeper, then Brennan and Jenkins and everyone else would have to back off. It's not improper if we're married. You're proposing marriage. I'm proposing a solution to a problem. The clinical way he said it stung more than Eliza expected. A business arrangement. A practical one. You need protection and legitimacy. I need... He stopped. What? What do you need? Someone to care if I live or die. Someone to share this burden with. Someone who understands why I can't leave even when every sane person would. He looked at her directly. I need you. I just don't know if that's enough reason to ask you to tie yourself to me permanently. Eliza's heart hammered. This wasn't romance. Wasn't love declared under moonlight with poetry and promises. It was two damaged people offering each other survival wrapped in legal protection. And yet, if I say yes, she said slowly, what would that look like? Honestly, probably a lot like now. We work together, eat together, keep each other company. But legally, you'd be protected. You'd have a claim to the ranch if something happened to me. You'd have a name that meant something. Cole? It's not much, but it's mine. And I'd give it to you if you wanted it. Why? Because you've earned it. Because you stayed when you could have run. Because when I look at the future, I can't imagine it without you in it. He set down his glass. But I won't pressure you. This has to be your choice. Eliza thought about Boston, about the life she'd left behind, about her father's debts and the families who'd employed her, and the constant feeling of being temporary, disposable, not quite good enough. She thought about Thomas Brennan's face when he'd rejected her, the casual cruelty of being judged and found wanting. Then she thought about the last 6 weeks, the work that had nearly broken her but made her stronger, the land that had tested her and grudgingly accepted her, the man across from her who'd given her a chance when she had nothing. Yes, she said. Ethan blinked. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. You're sure? Because once we do this, there's no taking it back without serious consequences. I'm sure. I'd rather face the future as your wife than face it alone. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or something deeper he wasn't ready to name. All right then, he said quietly. We'll go into town tomorrow. Get the license. Find someone to perform the ceremony. Just like that? Just like that. Eliza laughed, slightly hysterical. This is insane. We're getting married to spite Thomas Brennan and protect my reputation. And to be less alone. And to be less alone, she agreed. They sat in silence, the magnitude of what they'd just decided settling over them like dust. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't what either of them had imagined when they thought about marriage. But it was real and practical, and somehow right in a way that made sense only to them. For what it's worth, Ethan said finally, I'll try to be a good husband. And I'll try to be a good wife. I don't think you have to try. You already are. The compliment landed unexpectedly, warming something in Eliza's chest. She finished her whiskey, set the glass aside, and stood. I should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. Eliza? She turned at the door. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you let me. The ride into town the next morning felt different than the last one. They were still tense, still preparing for judgment and gossip, but there was purpose now, a plan that gave them solid ground to stand on. The county clerk was a thin, nervous man named Whitmore, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else when Ethan and Eliza walked in. We need a marriage license, Ethan said without preamble. Whitmore's eyes went wide. You and Mrs. Hart? That a problem? No, no problem, just unexpected. Life's full of surprises. Can you process the paperwork or not? It took an hour of forms and questions, and Whitmore's increasingly obvious discomfort before they had the license in hand. Then came the harder part, finding someone to perform the ceremony. The minister at the church took one look at them and declined, citing concerns about the circumstances. 2 other officials gave similar excuses. Finally, they found the justice of the peace, an old man named Gardner who'd clearly stopped caring about scandal decades ago. You two sure about this? He asked, looking between them. Yes, they said together. All right then. Who's witnessing? Ethan looked around the small office, clearly not having thought this through. The only other person present was Gardner's clerk, a young woman who looked at Eliza with something like sympathy. I'll witness, she said quietly. Someone should. The ceremony was brief, perfunctory, nothing like the weddings Eliza had imagined as a girl. Gardner read from a book in a monotone voice. Ethan repeated vows with mechanical precision. Eliza's hand shook when she took Ethan's, the weight of what they were doing finally hitting her. "Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Eliza Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She looked at Ethan, this hard, lonely man who'd given her shelter and purpose and a fighting chance. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Ethan hesitated, clearly not having anticipated this part. Eliza solved the problem by standing on her toes and pressing a brief, chaste kiss to his cheek. "There," she whispered, "official." They signed the papers. The clerk witnessed. And just like that, Eliza Hart became Eliza Cole, married to a man she'd known for 6 weeks, tied to a land that had tried to break her, committed to a future she couldn't predict. They walked out of the office into bright sunlight. People stared, whispered, pointed. Ethan took her hand, the first time he'd done so in public, and held it firmly. "Let them talk," he said. "You're mine now, legally. That means something." "What does it mean?" "It means nobody can touch you without going through me first." They walked to their horses, heads high, hands joined. And if the whole town was talking, if Thomas Brennan heard and raged, if scandal bloomed like wildfire, none of it mattered. Because Eliza Cole was done being rejected. She'd found her place, her name, her fight, and she wasn't giving any of it up without a war. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than it should have. They were married now, legally bound, but neither seemed to know what that meant beyond the paperwork. Ethan rode slightly ahead, his posture tense, while Eliza followed on Rosie, turning the thin gold band on her finger that Ethan had purchased from the general store after the ceremony. It was simple, plain, exactly like everything else in her new life. The sun was starting its descent when they reached the ranch. Ethan dismounted and helped Eliza down, his hands on her waist, careful, almost formal. "I'll see to the horses," he said, already turning away. "Ethan?" He stopped, but didn't look at her. "What happens now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're married. Do things change? Do we—" She struggled for the right words. "What are you expecting?" Finally he turned and she saw the discomfort in his face. "I'm not expecting anything. You have your room, I have mine. We keep working the ranch like always. The only difference is now you have legal protection and a name that people have to respect. That's it? What else did you think would happen?" Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. She didn't know what she'd expected, but the clinical dismissal hurt more than it should have. "Nothing. You're right. Nothing changes." She walked to the house before he could see her face, before the stupid tears could fall. This was a business arrangement. She'd known that going in. There was no reason to feel disappointed that her husband was treating their marriage like a contract instead of a commitment. Inside, she moved through the familiar motions of starting dinner, laying out plates, trying to pretend everything was normal. But her hands shook when she cut vegetables, and she had to stop twice to collect herself. She'd been rejected by Thomas Brennan for not being enough. And now, married to Ethan, she was too much of the wrong things, too practical, too convenient. Not the kind of woman who inspired passion or devotion, just useful, like a good horse or a sharp knife. Dinner was silent and awkward. They ate mechanically, not looking at each other, the space between them filled with all the things neither could say. When Eliza stood to clear the plates, Ethan finally spoke. "I didn't mean to hurt you." She paused, her back to him. "You didn't. Don't lie. You're terrible at it." Despite herself, Eliza almost smiled. "I'm not hurt. I'm just adjusting to the reality of what we've done." "Which is?" "Locked ourselves into something neither of us knows how to navigate." She turned to face him. "You said you'd try to be a good husband. What does that mean to you?" Ethan looked uncomfortable, like she'd asked him to solve an equation he didn't have the tools for. "I don't know, provide for you, protect you, not hurt you. That's a very low bar." "It's the only one I know." He stood, carried his plate to the basin. My father wasn't exactly a model of marital excellence, and my mother, she endured. That's what wives did in her world. They endured. I don't want to endure you, Ethan. Then what do you want? The question hung in the air between them. What did she want? She'd spent so long just trying to survive that she'd forgotten to think about what came after survival. I want to matter, she said finally. Not just as a worker or a problem solved. I want to matter to you as a person. You do matter. As what? Your employee who happens to share your last name? Ethan's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Isn't it? You married me to protect me from scandal, to make things easier, not because you wanted a wife. I married you because I couldn't imagine not having you here. The words came out harsh, frustrated. Because the thought of you leaving made me realize how empty this place would be without you. Is that what you want to hear? Eliza stared at him. Yes, actually. Well, there it is. He turned away, his shoulders rigid. I'm not good at this. At talking about feelings or whatever the hell this is. I know work. I know survival. I don't know how to be a husband beyond the legal definition. Then we learn together. How? I don't know. But maybe we start by being honest, by not treating this like just another business transaction. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. I'm scared I'll disappoint you, that you'll realize you made a mistake marrying me. The vulnerability in those words nearly undid her. I'm scared of the same thing, that I'm not enough, that I'll never be enough. You're enough, Eliza. So are you. They looked at each other across the kitchen, two people who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. Slowly, Ethan crossed the space between them and took her hand. His thumb traced the gold band on her finger. I'll try, he said quietly, to be more than just adequate, to be someone worth being married to. I'll try too. We're terrible at this. Catastrophically bad, Eliza agreed, and finally, Ethan smiled. A real one, not the brief quirk of lips she'd seen before, but something genuine that transformed his entire face. Come on, he said, still holding her hand. Let's sit outside, watch the sunset like normal people instead of whatever we are. They sat on the porch steps as the sky turned orange and pink and purple, the land stretching out before them in all its harsh beauty. Ethan kept hold of her hand, his grip warm and steady, and Eliza felt some of the tension drain from her body. This is nice, she said. It is. We should do it more often. Probably should do a lot of things more often. Talking, not working ourselves to death, remembering we're people instead of just labor. Revolutionary concepts. You're mocking me. Little bit. He squeezed her hand gently. Fair enough. They sat until the stars came out, neither wanting to move, neither ready to break whatever fragile peace they'd found. Eventually, the cold drove them inside, where they moved through their evening routines with new awareness of each other. At the door to her room, Eliza paused. Ethan? Yeah? Thank you for today, for all of it. Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow Brennan's going to hear we got married and all hell is going to break loose. Let it. We'll handle it together. Something passed between them, understanding and commitment, and the beginning of something that might, eventually, become partnership in more than just name. Eliza was right about the hell breaking loose. 2 days after the wedding, a rider arrived at dawn with a message. Ethan read it twice, his expression darkening with each pass. What is it? Eliza asked, mixing dough for bread. Brennan. He's calling in a debt. What debt? One I didn't know existed. Ethan tossed the letter onto the table. Apparently my father borrowed money from Brennan's father years ago. $500. The note says it's due now, with interest. Total owed is $750. Eliza's hands stilled in the dough. Do you have that much? Not liquid. I'd have to sell cattle, and we need the herd for breeding, or sell land, which I won't do. Or, he stopped. Or what? Or default, and Brennan can claim the ranch as collateral. The words fell like stones. Eliza carefully washed her hands, forcing herself to think clearly. Is the debt legitimate? No idea. My father kept terrible records. It's possible. He borrowed from everyone when things got tight. But the timing is suspicious as hell. Because we got married. Because we embarrassed him. He punched back harder. Ethan picked up the letter again. He's giving me 30 days to pay. Can we fight it? How? Lawyers cost money we don't have. And even if we could prove it's fake, that takes time. Time we don't have. Eliza's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Selling her jewelry wouldn't come close. Taking loans would just exchange one debt for another. And if they lost the ranch? No, she wouldn't let that happen. There has to be another way, she said. If there is, I can't see it. They spent the day working in tense silence, both thinking about the impossible situation Brennan had created. By evening, Eliza had the beginnings of an idea. It was dangerous and possibly stupid, but it was something. I'm going to see Brennan, she announced over dinner. Ethan's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Absolutely not. Why not? Because he'll humiliate you, use it against us, make everything worse. Or I might be able to negotiate, woman to man, appeal to whatever shred of decency he has left. He doesn't have any, that's the point. Then what's your plan? Wait 30 days and lose everything? Ethan slammed his hand on the table. I'm not letting you go beg that bastard for mercy. I'm not begging. I'm negotiating. There's a difference. There's not. Not to him. He'll see it as weakness and exploit it. So you'd rather lose the ranch than let me try? I'd rather find another solution that doesn't involve you putting yourself in his power. I'm already in his power. We both are. At least this way, I'm doing something instead of waiting to be destroyed. They stared at each other across the table, wills clashing. Finally, Ethan looked away. If you go, I'm coming with you. That defeats the purpose. I don't care. You're not facing him alone. Ethan, that's the deal. You go, I go. Or neither of us goes. Eliza wanted to argue, but she saw the fear beneath his anger, the terror of losing her to Brennan's manipulations, the memory of watching his mother endure his father's failures. Fine, she said. We go together. They rode to Brennan's ranch the next morning, both dressed in their best. Ethan in a clean shirt and vest, Eliza in the dark blue dress she'd worn when she first arrived. Armor, she thought again. They were going to war. Brennan's spread was everything the Double C wasn't. Manicured lawns, painted fences, a sprawling house with actual curtains in the windows. Wealth displayed without apology. A servant met them at the door, a young Mexican woman who looked at Eliza with barely concealed pity. Mr. Brennan is expecting you. This way. They were shown to a study that reeked of cigars and leather. Brennan sat behind a massive desk, looking pleased with himself. Well, well, the newlyweds. Congratulations on your hasty nuptials. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. To what do I owe this pleasure? You know why we're here, Ethan said flatly. The debt? Yes, unfortunate business, but money is money, and debts must be paid. You're calling it in because we embarrassed you, Eliza said, stepping forward. This has nothing to do with the money and everything to do with revenge. Mrs. Cole. Brennan's use of her married name was mocking. Such harsh accusations. I'm simply conducting business. You're trying to destroy us. I'm trying to collect what's owed. If that destroys you, perhaps you should have chosen your husband more carefully. The words hit their target. Eliza felt Ethan tense beside her, but she kept her focus on Brennan. What do you want? She asked quietly. I told you, $750 in 30 days. You know we can't raise that much that quickly. Then I'll take the ranch. Fair trade for a defaulted debt. There's nothing fair about this, and you know it. Brennan leaned back in his chair, studying her like a specimen. You know what I find interesting, Mrs. Cole? How much you've changed since I left you at that gate. You were broken then. Pathetic. Now you've got fire. Spirit. Almost makes me regret my decision. The words hung in the air like a threat and a promise. Almost, he continued, but not quite. You see, I need a woman who knows her place, who understands that a man's word is law. You clearly don't have that quality. Too independent. Too willing to challenge. He stood, walked around the desk to stand too close to Eliza. "But I'm willing to make you an offer." "Don't," Ethan warned, his hand moving toward his hip. Brennan ignored him, keeping his eyes on Eliza. "Leave Cole. Come back to me. Be the wife I originally offered you the chance to be. And I'll forgive the debt entirely." The room went silent except for Ethan's sharp intake of breath. Eliza looked at Brennan, this man who'd rejected her, thrown her away, and was now trying to reclaim her like a possession he'd discarded too hastily. "No," she said. "Think carefully before you answer." "I don't need to think. The answer is no, now and forever." "You'd choose poverty over security, hardship over comfort, a failing ranch over everything I could give you?" "Yes," without hesitation. "Why?" The question sounded genuinely curious. "Because Ethan sees me as a person, not a decoration. Because the ranch is hard work that matters, not easy comfort that suffocates. Because I'd rather fight beside someone who respects me than live in luxury with someone who despises me." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You threw me away, Mr. Brennan. You don't get to pick me back up when it's convenient." Brennan's face flushed red. "Then you'll lose everything." "Maybe, but at least I'll lose it on my terms." "You're a fool." "I'm free. That's more than I'd ever be with you." She turned and walked out, Ethan close behind. They didn't speak until they were mounted and halfway home. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," Ethan said quietly. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever done. I just sealed our fate. You chose me over security, over wealth, over everything most people want. Of course I did. You're my husband. A husband you married out of convenience. A husband who's become more than convenient." Eliza looked at him. "I meant what I said in there. I'd rather fight beside you than live easy with him." Ethan reined Duchess to a stop. Eliza stopped Rosie beside him. They sat there in the middle of the road, the sun beating down, the future uncertain. "I love you," Ethan said suddenly, the words rough and unpracticed. "I don't know when it happened or how, but I love you. And I'll find a way to fix this. I'll save the ranch." Eliza's throat tightened. "Ethan, I need you to know, in case everything goes to hell. I need you to know you matter, not just as a worker or a convenience, as my wife, as the person I want to spend my life with." "I love you too," Eliza whispered. "I think I have for weeks. I was just too scared to admit it." They kissed there on the road, a real kiss this time. Not the ceremonial peck from the wedding. It was desperate and honest and tasted like hope mixed with fear. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "We'll figure this out." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we will." They rode home in silence, but it was different now, comfortable, like they'd finally found the thing they'd been dancing around since the beginning. That night, Eliza moved her things into Ethan's room, not because they had to, but because she wanted to. Because marriage was more than separate rooms and polite distance. Because if they were going to face disaster, they'd do it together in every way that mattered. The next 2 weeks were a blur of desperate planning. They sold everything they could spare, tools, extra horses, every piece of furniture that wasn't essential. They raised $300, not nearly enough. Ethan considered selling breeding cattle, but that would cripple the ranch long term. Considered taking a loan from the bank, but the terms were predatory and would just trade one master for another. They were running out of options and time. Then, on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks into the 30-day deadline, smoke appeared on the horizon. Ethan saw it first, his body going rigid. "Fire." "Where?" Eliza shaded her eyes, trying to see. "South pasture, near the creek." He was already moving, saddling Duchess with frantic efficiency. "Get the wagon, load it with barrels and blankets. Meet me there." "Ethan, now, Eliza!" She ran, hitched the wagon, loaded supplies with shaking hands, drove the team harder than she'd ever dared. The smoke grew thicker as she approached, and she could hear the fire now, a distant roar like an approaching train. When she reached the pasture, the scene was chaos. Flames consumed the grass in a wall of heat and light, racing toward the tree line. Ethan was already there with 3 neighboring ranchers who must have seen the smoke, all of them beating at the flames with wet blankets, trying to create a fire break. Eliza jumped down, soaked blankets in the barrels, and joined them. The heat was incredible, searing her face and hands. Smoke choked her lungs. Sparks jumped the fire break and started new blazes that had to be beaten down. They fought for hours. When her arms gave out, she switched to hauling water. When the barrels ran dry, she ran back to the creek to refill them, over and over until she couldn't feel her body anymore, until everything was smoke and fire and desperate motion. Finally, as the sun began to set, the fire died. They'd contained it, stopped it from spreading to the forest or the main ranch buildings. But the damage was done. 20 acres of prime grazing land burned to ash, fencing destroyed, cattle scattered or dead. Eliza collapsed in the dirt, coughing up smoke, her hands blistered and raw. Ethan dropped beside her, his face black with soot. "Everyone all right?" one of the neighbors called out. Murmurs of affirmation, injuries, but nothing fatal. They'd gotten lucky. "How'd it start?" another asked. Ethan looked at Eliza and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." They found evidence 2 days later, a kerosene can hidden in the bushes near where the fire started. Deliberate. Arson. "Brennan," Ethan said, his voice cold as death, "you can't prove it." "I don't need proof. I know." He was right. This had Brennan's fingerprints all over it. The timing too perfect, the damage too calculated. If they'd lost the ranch buildings, they'd have been completely destroyed. As it was, they'd lost valuable pasture and cattle they couldn't afford to lose. The final blow before the debt came due. "What do we do?" Eliza asked. "We survive. It's all we can do." But surviving felt impossible now. With the fire damage, they had even less to sell, fewer resources to draw from. The 30-day deadline arrived like a death sentence. The morning it came due, they sat at the kitchen table, facing reality. "We have $420, Ethan said flatly. "We need $750. We're short $330, which we don't have and can't raise." He looked at her. "I'm sorry, Eliza. I tried. I fought. But I'm going to lose the ranch. We're going to lose it, and we'll survive that too." "How? Where will we go?" "I don't know, but we'll figure it out together." A knock at the door interrupted them. Ethan opened it to find a lawyer from town, a weaselly man named Porter who worked for Brennan. "Mr. Cole, I'm here to collect payment or serve notice of foreclosure." "We don't have the full amount." "Then the ranch transfers to Mr. Brennan's ownership immediately. You have 1 week to vacate. 1 week to leave everything my family built?" "Those are the terms." Porter handed him papers. "Sign here acknowledging receipt of foreclosure notice." Ethan took the pen, his hand shaking with rage. But before he could sign, hoofbeats sounded outside. Multiple riders approaching fast. They all turned to see 6 men on horseback, led by a tall rancher Eliza recognized from the fire, a man named Harrison, who owned the spread east of them. "Hold on, Porter," Harrison called out, dismounting, "before you finish that paperwork. This is a private matter. It's county business when a man loses his ranch to fraud." Harrison pulled out a leather pouch. "We took up a collection. Every rancher who fought that fire with you, Cole. Nobody believes it started naturally, and nobody thinks Brennan's debt is legitimate. But until we can prove it, we figured we'd help." He dumped the contents on the table. Cash. A pile of it. "That's $350, Harrison said. "Combined with what you have, it's enough to pay off Brennan and tell him to go to hell." Ethan stared at the money like he couldn't process what he was seeing. "I can't accept this." Sure you can. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. Pay us back when you can. Or don't. We take care of our own out here." "Why would you do this?" "Because Brennan's been squeezing small ranchers for years, buying up land through intimidation and manufactured debts. Someone needs to stand up to him." Harrison clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Might as well be you." Eliza felt tears burning her eyes. Community, support, people choosing to help instead of watch them fall. "Count it," Porter said weakly, knowing he'd lost. They counted. $750 exactly. "Pay the man," Harrison said with satisfaction. Ethan counted out the money, placed it in Porter's shaking hands. Tell Brennan the debt is paid in full, and tell him if he comes near my property again, I'll shoot him for trespassing." Porter fled. The gathered ranchers stayed for coffee, for stories, for the simple act of community that Eliza had never experienced before. They were rough men, hard living, but they'd chosen to stand together against a common enemy. When they finally left, Eliza and Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them ride away. "We almost lost everything," Ethan said quietly, "but we didn't. Because people we barely know chose to help us. Because they saw something worth saving." Eliza took his hand. "We're not alone anymore, Ethan. We never were. We just didn't know it." He pulled her close, and they stood there as the sun set on a day that could have ended everything but instead became the beginning of something new. A community. A partnership. A marriage that had started as convenience and become something real. Eliza thought about the woman who'd sat at that gate months ago, broken and rejected. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd fought for her place and won. The ranch was saved, the debt was paid, and Thomas Brennan's power had finally met its match. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the land would keep testing them. Life would stay hard. But tonight, Eliza Cole stood in her husband's arms on land that was theirs, surrounded by community that had chosen them, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope, as it turned out, was easier to feel than to maintain. The week after paying off Brennan's debt should have been a celebration, but instead it brought a harsh new reality. They'd survived foreclosure, but they were broke. Completely, devastatingly broke. Every spare dollar had gone to saving the ranch, and now they faced winter with depleted resources and burned pasture land that wouldn't recover for months. Eliza stood in the kitchen 3 days after their victory, staring at their remaining supplies. Flour, beans, a little salt. Maybe 2 weeks of food if they stretched it. The garden had produced some vegetables, but not enough. The chickens were laying, but barely, and they couldn't afford to slaughter cattle they needed for breeding. "We'll make it work," Ethan said from behind her, but even he didn't sound convinced. "How? We can't eat hope. We've survived worse. Have we? Because right now I'm not sure." She turned to face him. "I'm not giving up. I'm just being realistic. We saved the ranch, but we're starving on it." The words hung between them, ugly and true. Ethan's jaw tightened, and she saw the shame in his eyes, the failure of not being able to provide. "I'll find work," he said. "In town. Temporary. Enough to get us through winter." "And leave me to run the ranch alone?" "You can handle it. That's not the point. We're supposed to be partners. Partners don't let each other starve." Before Eliza could respond, hoofbeats sounded outside. They both tensed automatically now at the sound of visitors. Too many bad surprises lately. But when Ethan opened the door, it wasn't trouble. It was Harrison and 2 other ranchers, their wagons loaded with supplies. "Morning," Harrison said, tipping his hat. "Figured you might be running low after paying off that debt. Brought some things to tide you over." The wagons held flour, sugar, salt, dried meat, canned goods, even a sack of seed for spring planting. Enough to see them through winter and then some. "This is too much," Ethan said, his voice rough. "It's neighborly. You'd do the same." Harrison gestured to his companions to start unloading. "Besides, word's getting around about what Brennan tried to pull. People are taking sides. You two are becoming symbols, whether you like it or not." "Symbols of what?" Eliza asked. "Standing up to bullies, fighting for what's yours, surviving when the deck's stacked against you." He smiled. "Folks like that. Gives them hope that maybe they can survive their own troubles." After the men left, Eliza and Ethan stood in the kitchen surrounded by supplies that represented more than just food. They represented community, support, the idea that isolation wasn't the only way to survive out here. "I'm not good at accepting help," Ethan said quietly. "Neither am I. We'll learn together." "You say that a lot." "Because it's true. Everything out here we learn by doing. Why should this be different?" Over the next few weeks, they discovered what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. Harrison's wife, Martha, came by to teach Eliza techniques for preserving food and managing winter supplies. Other ranch wives followed, initially curious about the woman who'd married Ethan Cole, staying because they found someone who listened and asked real questions instead of judging. Eliza learned she wasn't the only woman struggling with the isolation and hardship of frontier life. Martha had lost 2 children to fever. Sarah Winters fought daily with a husband who drank too much. Anna Chen faced constant prejudice for her Chinese heritage despite being born in Montana. They all survived by helping each other, by sharing knowledge and resources, and the simple act of witnessing each other's struggles. "You're different now," Ethan observed one evening after the women had left. "More settled. I found my people, other women who understand what this life costs." "Oh, you like them?" "I do." "Is that surprising?" "Little bit. You seemed like a loner when you arrived." "I wasn't a loner. I was alone. There's a difference." Eliza poured them both coffee. "Back east, I never fit. I was always trying to be what others wanted. Here, I can just be myself and people accept it." "Even the gossip about us?" "The gossip's died down since we paid off Brennan. Now we're just another married couple trying to survive." She smiled. "Boring and respectable." "You're many things, Eliza Cole. Boring isn't one of them." The compliment warmed her more than the coffee. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm in their marriage, comfortable with each other in ways that surprised them both. Separate people who'd learned to function as a unit without losing themselves. But Thomas Brennan wasn't finished with them yet. The confrontation came in early November, at the monthly livestock auction in town. Ethan was selling some steers, trying to build up their cash reserves before winter fully hit. Eliza came along, both for support and because she'd learned to handle the business side of ranching. They were examining a pen of cattle when Brennan appeared, flanked by 2 men who looked like hired muscle. "Cole." His voice cut through the crowd noise. "A word." "I've got nothing to say to you." "Then listen." Brennan stepped closer, his face hard. "You embarrassed me, cost me money, made me look weak in front of the entire county. That has consequences. You tried to destroy us with a fake debt and arson. We survived. That's not my problem. Everything that happens to you is my problem until I decide otherwise." Brennan's eyes shifted to Eliza. "Last chance, Mrs. Cole, leave him. Come with me. I'll set you up nicely. Your own house in town. An allowance. Respectability." Eliza felt Ethan tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "I already gave you my answer. That was when you thought you were going to keep the ranch. Now you're one bad winter away from losing everything anyway. Why suffer when you don't have to? Because suffering beside someone who loves me is better than comfort with someone who sees me as property." Brennan's face reddened. "You stupid woman. You could have had everything." "I have everything. You just can't see it because it's not measured in money or status." "Then you'll die poor and forgotten." "Better that than live rich and hollow." The words landed like a slap. Brennan's hand twitched toward his hip, where Eliza knew he carried a gun. Ethan moved to block her, his own hand ready. "Don't," Ethan warned. "Or what? You'll hit me again? In front of witnesses?" Brennan smiled coldly. "Go ahead. Assault me in public. Give me grounds to have you arrested." The crowd had gone silent, watching. Eliza could feel the weight of judgment, the town holding its breath to see what would happen. She stepped around Ethan, putting herself between the 2 men. "Mr. Brennan," she said clearly, her voice carrying, "you're a wealthy man. You own a beautiful ranch. You have everything money can buy. But you're standing here at a livestock auction, harassing a woman who rejected you months ago. Have you considered what that says about you? Careful. That you're so empty inside that my rejection still burns. That you're so desperate for control you can't accept someone choosing differently. That for all your wealth and power, you're fundamentally alone because nobody actually wants to be with you." The silence was absolute. Brennan's face had gone from red to white, his hands shaking with rage. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "I doubt it. Because unlike you, I've learned that the only opinions that matter are from people I respect. And I don't respect you, Mr. Brennan. I pity you." She turned and walked away, Ethan beside her, leaving Brennan standing there with his hired men and his humiliation and an entire town that had just watched him get dismantled by the woman he'd thrown away. They made it to their wagon before Eliza started shaking. The adrenaline crashed through her system, making her hands tremble as she climbed up to the seat. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing you've ever done," Ethan said, taking the reins. "Both, probably. He's going to retaliate. Let him. I'm tired of being afraid of him, tired of letting him control our lives from a distance." She looked at her husband. "We survived his debt. We survived the fire. We'll survive whatever comes next." "You sound sure." "I am, because I'm done being a victim of other people's choices. My life is mine now. Our life is ours, and he doesn't get a vote." Ethan smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "I love you." "I love you too. Now, let's go home before I lose my nerve and realize what I just did." The retaliation came, but not in the way they expected. Instead of direct confrontation, Brennan went to the territorial governor with a complaint about property boundaries, claimed that the Double C had encroached on his land, that fences had been moved, that Ethan was stealing grazing rights. It was nonsense, easily disproven, but it required surveys and lawyers and time they didn't have. It tied them up in bureaucracy and legal fees they could barely afford. "He's bleeding us dry through paperwork," Ethan said, reading yet another legal notice. "Death by 1,000 cuts instead of one killing blow." "Can we fight it?" "We are fighting it. But it's costing money every time we have to respond, every time we need documentation, every time we prove he's lying." He threw the paper down in frustration. "He's got unlimited resources. We don't." Eliza looked at the stack of legal notices, the bills from lawyers, the mounting evidence of Brennan's campaign to destroy them through attrition. A different kind of fight than physical confrontation, but just as deadly. "Then we change tactics," she said. "How?" "We make it public. All of it. The fake debt, the fire, the boundary disputes. We write it all down and send it to the territorial newspaper. Let everyone see what he's doing. That'll make him angrier. He's already trying to destroy us. How much angrier can he get?" She pulled out paper and pen. "Besides, he operates in shadow, in back rooms and quiet threats. Sunlight kills that kind of power." They worked through the night, documenting everything, dates, witnesses, evidence. They wrote it clearly, factually, letting the pattern speak for itself. A wealthy rancher systematically trying to destroy a smaller operation through legal harassment and intimidation. The territorial newspaper published it 2 weeks later under the headline, "Land Barons' War on Small Ranchers." Within days, other ranchers came forward with similar stories. Brennan had been doing this for years, quietly accumulating land through pressure and manufactured crises. Now it was all exposed. The backlash was swift. The territorial government launched an investigation. The county sheriff, who'd been in Brennan's pocket, suddenly faced scrutiny for ignoring complaints, and Brennan himself became a pariah. His reputation for fair dealing destroyed by the weight of evidence. But cornered animals were the most dangerous, and Brennan was very much cornered. The attack came on a cold December night. Eliza woke to Duchess screaming in the barn, a sound of pure terror that brought her out of bed instantly. "Fire," Ethan said, already pulling on boots. "He's trying again." They ran outside into chaos. The barn was ablaze, flames already consuming the roof. The horses were trapped inside, along with their winter hay supply and tools they couldn't afford to replace. Ethan ran for the barn doors. Eliza grabbed buckets, knowing it was hopeless, but unable to do nothing. The heat was incredible, the smoke choking. Ethan got the doors open and Duchess bolted out, followed by Rosie, both terrified but alive. He went back in for the tools, for anything salvageable, and Eliza screamed at him to stop, to let it go. But he didn't listen. The roof collapsed with a roar of sparks and flame. Ethan was still inside. Eliza ran toward the burning building without thinking, without caring about the heat or danger. Someone grabbed her from behind, holding her back. "You can't help him by dying too!" Harrison's voice shouted in her ear. She fought against his grip, screaming Ethan's name, watching their life burn while her husband was somewhere in that inferno. Then a figure stumbled out of the smoke. Ethan, coughing and burned but alive, dragging a toolbox and saddles. He collapsed in the dirt, and Eliza was there, checking him for injuries, crying and furious, and so grateful she couldn't speak. "I'm okay," he rasped. "Got what I could. You almost died for tools." Tools we need to survive. I need you to survive more than I need tools. Harrison and 3 other ranchers who'd seen the flames had arrived with wagons and water. They fought the fire while Eliza tended to Ethan's burns, her hands shaking with fear and adrenaline. By dawn, the barn was a smoking ruin. Their hay was gone, most of their equipment destroyed, and sitting on a fence post where they'd be sure to find it was a note. Ethan read it aloud, his voice flat. "This could have been your house. Leave Montana while you still can." "He's threatening to kill us," Eliza said numbly. "He's trying to scare us into running. It's working." Ethan looked at her, his face streaked with soot and exhaustion. "You want to leave?" "Did she?" Part of her screamed yes. Leave before Brennan killed them both. Take what little they had and start over somewhere safer. Somewhere without enemies who burned buildings in the night. But another part of her, the part that had survived rejection and built calluses and learned to shoot, refused to run. "No," she said. "I want to stay and fight. Even if it kills us? Even then, because if we run, he wins. He gets to keep terrorizing people. And we spend the rest of our lives being the couple who were run off their land by a bully." She looked at the ruins of their barn, at the ranch that had tested and changed her. "This is our home, Ethan. We don't give it up without a fight." Harrison walked over, his face grim. Found tracks. 2 riders, heading southeast, toward Brennan's place. "Can we prove it was him?" Ethan asked. "Tracks aren't proof, but we all know." He looked at the other ranchers who'd gathered. "This has gone too far. He's not just harassing you anymore. He's committing arson, making death threats. Someone needs to stop him." "The law won't," Ethan said bitterly. "The sheriff's bought. The territorial government moves too slow." "Then we handle it ourselves." The words hung in the cold morning air, heavy with implication. Vigilante justice, taking the law into their own hands. "No," Eliza said firmly. "We're not becoming what he is. We're not solving violence with more violence." "Then what do you suggest?" Harrison asked, not unkindly. "We go to him, all of us. Every rancher he's hurt, every family he's threatened. We confront him together, witnesses to everything, and we give him a choice. Leave Montana or face consequences. He'll just hire more men, fortify his ranch. Maybe. Or maybe facing a united front will show him he can't win. That public opinion and numbers matter more than money." It was a gamble, a huge one. But as Eliza looked at the faces of the people who'd shown up to fight her fire, who'd donated supplies, who'd stood with them against Brennan's attacks, she saw something that gave her courage. Community. Real, powerful, unwilling to be pushed around anymore. "I'm in," Harrison said. "Me too," said Sarah Winters. One by one, the others agreed. By noon, they had 15 ranching families committed. By evening, 20. Word spread through the county like the fire that had started all this, and people who'd suffered in silence found their voices. 3 days later, a convoy of wagons rolled up to Thomas Brennan's ranch. 40 people, men and women, standing together on his manicured lawn. Brennan came out flanked by 6 hired guns, but even he could see the numbers weren't in his favor. "What is this?" he demanded. Eliza stepped forward. She'd been elected spokesperson, the woman who'd survived his rejection and become the symbol of resistance. "This is everyone you've hurt, threatened, or tried to destroy," she said clearly. "We're here to give you a choice. I don't take orders from, you can leave Montana. Sell your ranch, take your money, and start over somewhere else. Or you can stay and face investigation for arson, fraud, intimidation, and attempted murder. The territorial governor has been given documentation of everything you've done. The newspaper is ready to publish a follow-up story, and every person here is willing to testify against you." Brennan's face went through several colors. His hired guns shifted nervously, outnumbered, and clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "You're bluffing," Brennan said. "Try us." Ethan moved to stand beside Eliza. "You've made enemies of everyone here. United us when we used to be isolated. That's your legacy, Brennan. You created the thing that'll destroy you." "I could have you all arrested for trespassing." "You could try, but Sheriff Jenkins is currently under investigation himself for corruption. The new acting sheriff is standing right there." Eliza pointed to a tall man in the crowd. and he's very interested in the evidence we've compiled. The acting sheriff stepped forward, a young man named Thompson who'd only recently been appointed. Mr. Brennan, I'm here officially to inform you that there will be a full investigation into allegations of arson and attempted murder. You're not under arrest yet, but I'd advise you to stay available for questioning. Brennan looked at the crowd, at the unified front of people he'd spent years intimidating individually. Looked at Eliza, the woman he'd rejected now standing victorious on his lawn. Looked at his empire and saw it crumbling. This isn't over, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is, Eliza said softly. You just don't know it yet. They left him there, standing in front of his big house with his hired guns and his money and his absolute isolation. No community to support him, no one willing to stand with him, just wealth and emptiness, and the knowledge that he'd lost to people he'd considered beneath him. The investigation took months, but the conclusion was inevitable. Faced with overwhelming evidence and testimony from dozens of witnesses, Brennan agreed to leave Montana rather than face trial. He sold his ranch for a fraction of its value and disappeared east, his reputation destroyed, his power broken. The land he'd accumulated through intimidation was redistributed to the families he'd displaced. The territorial government implemented new protections against the kind of legal harassment he'd practiced. And a community that had been fragmented and isolated learned the power of standing together. Winter passed into spring. Eliza and Ethan rebuilt the barn with help from neighbors, better and stronger than before. The burned pasture recovered, grass pushing through ash to create new growth. The ranch didn't just survive. It began to thrive. On a warm April morning, Eliza stood on the porch watching Ethan work with a new colt in the corral. She was 4 months pregnant now, her body changing in ways that both terrified and delighted her. They'd argued about whether they were ready for children, whether they could afford another mouth to feed, whether the world was safe enough. In the end, they decided that nothing was ever safe or certain, and waiting for perfect conditions meant waiting forever. Martha came by with fresh bread, the kind of casual visit that happened regularly now. How are you feeling? Tired, nauseous, terrified. Sounds about right. Martha sat beside her, comfortable in the silence. You've come a long way from the woman Brennan left at the gate. That woman doesn't exist anymore. She does. She's just buried under all the strength you built on top of her. Martha smiled. That's what this land does. Shows you who you are under everything you thought you were supposed to be. Eliza thought about that, about the governess from Boston who'd crossed a continent for a marriage that never happened, about the broken woman sitting on a trunk, waiting for death or rescue, about the person she'd become through work and hardship and love that grew in unexpected soil. I'm glad he rejected me, she said suddenly. Martha raised an eyebrow. That's a hell of a thing to say. It's true, though. If Brennan had married me, I'd be someone else, someone smaller, someone who existed to please him and meet his standards and never challenged anything. She looked at the ranch, at the land that had tested her, and the community that had accepted her. Getting rejected was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to become someone I actually like. Does Ethan know you think that? He knows. We talked about it once, about how the worst moments sometimes lead to the best outcomes. Eliza touched her growing belly. If everything had gone according to plan, I'd never have this, any of this. Ethan finished with the colt and walked over, sweaty and dusty and smiling. He kissed Eliza's forehead, greeted Martha, and settled on the steps. Talking about me? He asked. Always, Eliza said. I was just telling Martha that getting rejected by Brennan was the best thing that happened to me. Harsh but fair. He took her hand. You think that woman at the gate would recognize who you are now? Not a chance. That woman thought she needed a man to save her. This woman knows she saved herself. With some help, Ethan added. With partnership, Eliza corrected, which is different than rescue. They sat together, 3 people comfortable in silence, watching the land stretch out under a wide sky. Somewhere in Boston, Eliza's old life continued without her, probably not even remembering she'd existed. Somewhere Brennan was starting over, carrying his bitterness and isolation to new territory. But here, on this ranch built by work and defended by community, Eliza Cole had found something worth more than security or status, or any of the things she'd thought mattered. She'd found herself, her people, her purpose. She'd found home. The baby kicked, a small flutter that made her gasp and laugh. Ethan's hand covered hers on her belly, both of them feeling the life they'd created together. "You ready for this?" he asked quietly. "No." "Are you?" "Not even close." "Good. At least we'll be terrified together." Martha laughed. "That's parenting in a nutshell. Terror and love mix so thoroughly you can't separate them." As the sun climbed higher and the day's work called, Eliza thought about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. About rejection that led to reinvention, about hardship that forged strength, about community built from shared struggle and stubborn survival. She thought about the gate where Ethan had found her and how far she'd traveled since then. Not in miles, but in self-knowledge, in courage, in the understanding that sometimes the life you planned isn't the life you needed. Sometimes you need to be broken down completely to build yourself back stronger. Sometimes rejection is the first step toward finding out who you really are. Sometimes the worst thing that happens is actually the door opening to your real life. Years later, when their daughter asked how they met, Eliza and Ethan would tell her the truth. About a woman left at a gate and a lonely rancher who made a choice that changed everything. About hardship and community and learning to love someone through shared struggle instead of easy romance. They'd tell her that life rarely goes according to plan, and that's not always a bad thing. They'd tell her that strength isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. They'd tell her that community matters more than individual power, that standing together beats standing alone, that the people who show up when everything's burning are your real family. But most importantly, they'd tell her that she was born from a love that wasn't planned or easy or anything like the stories suggested. Born from two people who chose each other not because they were perfect matches, but because they were willing to do the work of becoming partners. And that made it real. That made it last. That made it worth every hard mile that led them to each other. Eliza Cole, née Hart, had traveled 1,000 miles to be rejected by a stranger. In that rejection, she'd found herself, found her strength, found a man who saw her not as she was supposed to be, but as she actually was, found a life that wasn't given to her, but one she'd claimed with her own calloused hands. And standing on her porch on that April morning, pregnant and tired and surrounded by community and partnership and love that had grown in rocky soil, Eliza finally understood what it meant to be enough. Not for someone else, for herself. That was the real victory. Not defeating Brennan, not saving the ranch, not even finding love, but finding the strength to stand at that gate, broken and alone, and choose to keep going anyway. Everything else just followed from that one stubborn decision to survive, to fight, to become. The woman left at the gate became the woman who built an empire from ashes, who stood up to bullies, who learned that rejection wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. And that, Eliza thought as she watched her husband work and felt her child grow and breathed in the Montana air that had once seemed so hostile and now felt like home, that was enough. More than enough. That was everything.